So as we discussed last month, the Jewish calendar has a certain rhythm to it, where every month is different than the month before. So welcome to HaChodesh HaSheni, the second month, which we call the month of Iyar. And this is a very different month than the month of Nisan, as we'll see. And in a sense, Iyar is kind of like the middle child of the Jewish calendar. Because in the month that precedes it, we have Pesach. So that's like the big bang of Jewish history. And then next month, we'll have Shavuot. So that's, Amad Har Sinai, God speaking directly to the entire Jewish people. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And then in the middle is this month of Iyar. There's no biblical holidays in it. Of course, in recent times, the additions of Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim have brought a new brightness to the month. But that's not the element of the month that we're going to focus on tonight. For most of Jewish history, Iyar would have been described as, for the most part, the month that sits between Pesach and Shavuot. And you might have thought, poor Iyar, until we realize that the month of Iyar is unique in a different way, as you might be thinking, because we're in the heart of the period of the Omer right now. So for 49 days, we count each day as unique. Hayom, Yom X, LaOmer. We count each week similarly as unique. Shehem X Shavuot LaOmer. So you could say, if you want to look at it more positively, that Iyar is actually the only month in the Jewish calendar where every day of the month is special. Maybe not as special as Pesach, maybe not as special as Shavuot, but literally every day of the month, sandwiched in between, gets an honorary mention. Okay, so with that as a starting point, I want to learn a source that will help us get into the mindset for the month of Iyar. Okay, so the source is going to deal with the following question. What pasuk in the Torah best captures what Judaism is all about? If you could only quote one pasuk to capture the essence of Judaism, what would that be? And when you ask that question, it reminds us of a famous story, not the source we're going to go through, but another story from Masechet Shabbat of the non-Jew who approaches Shammai and Hillel, and he says, I'll convert if you teach me all of the Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And of course, we know how that story goes. Shammai pushes him away. And Hillel famously says to him, he says, that which is hateful to you, don't do to your fellow. He says, De'alach sanai lechavrach lo tavi. Says, right, the thing which is hateful to you, don't do to your fellow. That is all of Torah. That is called Torah Kula. Okay, but in that case, Hillel isn't quoting a pasuk. In fact, the answer is in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. So he's giving a principle, you could say, that stands behind the Torah, but it doesn't answer the question that we're trying to get at, which is, if you only had one pasuk, which pasuk best captures the entirety of the Torah? And there is an amazing midrash that is quoted in the Ein Yaakov that tries to get at this, and that's the source that I want to go through first tonight. Let me see if I can share. Screen here. Okay, so let's go through this one together. So it starts. Matzati katuv b'shem hamidrash. This is a book called the Ein Yaakov, which basically is a compilation of midrashim and agaditas, and it was put together by Yaakov ibn Habib. And it's from the 16th century. Okay, so this is in the introduction. He says, I found written in the name of the Midrash, Uvekashtihu velo metzitihu bechol shita sidarai v'zeu nuskha. Says, I know that there's this Midrash, but I actually couldn't find the source. But here's the source. Here's the text. It's actually kind of interesting because this has become a somewhat famous Midrash, but it's saved for us by this book, the Ein Yaakov. Okay, so here's the midrash. It says, Benzoma Omer matzinu pasuk kolel yoter. Benzoma says, I've found a most inclusive verse. Vehu Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Pretty good verse, pretty good pasuk. Okay, so maybe that is the pasuk of the Torah that encapsulates the Torah the most. Ben Nanas Omer, a second opinion, Matzinu pasuk kolel yoter, vehu vehavta l'reacha kamocha. Second opinion, right? Vehavta l'reacha kamocha. Also, amazing. Makes sense that this would be the most inclusive pasuk in all of the Torah. Shimon ben Pazi Omer, Matzinu pasuk kolel yoter, vehu et hakevas ha'achad taseh baboker, ve'et hakevas hasheni taseh bein harabayim. He says, I have an even more inclusive pasuk, and that is, first you sacrifice a lamb in the morning, and then you sacrifice a lamb in the evening. This is very unexpected that he would pick this. But what's even more unexpected is the way that this midrash ends. It says, Amar Amad Rabbi Ploni araglav ve'amar halacha keben pazi. Rabbi Ploni, presumably that was a certain rabbi. And remember, this is a tradition that Yaakov ibn Chabib is trying to capture. So maybe it's hard to tell, but maybe this is, someone stood up and said the halacha is according to Ben Pazi. So as surprising as Ben Pazi's opinion is, it's even more surprising that the conclusion of the midrash is that his opinion is correct. Okay, so let's end. Let me stop sharing, and we'll unpack that a little bit. So there have been a number of interpretations given for what this midrash might mean, because it's certainly surprising. And a particularly beautiful one, I think, comes from Rabbi Sachs, who writes as follows. He says, this is his explanation of the three opinions. He says, Ben Zoma holds that the foundation of Judaism is its faith in one God. Hence, the key text is the declaration, Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael. Ben Nanas says that the most distinctive feature of Judaism is its ethics, founded as it is not just on fairness and reciprocity, but on love. Okay, so that's why he quotes Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But Ben Pazi, says Rabbi Sachs, whose answer is saved until last, offers a wholly unexpected reply. His quote is the verse from Numbers about the daily sacrifice. What is special about Judaism, says Ben Pazi, is its ritual, its daily acts of dedication, its choreography of small steps and everyday deeds. Okay? So I think it's a beautiful thought. And amazingly, again, this view of Ben Pazi is what gets the last word. And then Rabbi Sachs says something particularly beautiful. Actually, let me go back to sharing. I want to, a little dense, but I want to, so you can have it in front of you. Let me read through it. So this is what Rabbi Sachs says. It says, Judaism, suggests Ben Pazi, is not just poetry, but also prose, not just the fire of romantic love, but the daily kindnesses of a successful marriage, not just an exalted faith in the transcendent God, but the way it takes faith and translates it into everyday life. Judaism is, in the language of James of Joyce, a series of epiphanies of the ordinary. A beautiful line. A series of epiphanies of the ordinary. We encounter God not just in the thunder and lightning of Sinai, but every morning, every evening, in ritual and routine. I'm going to keep reading, because again, I just think it's a very beautiful, beautiful piece. Judaism, argues Ben Pazi, is a way of living life in quiet celebration. We bring our days to God. Morning and evening, we turn toward him, offering him something of ourselves. For that is what faith and love have to become if they're to transform our lives. God is not just a terrifying presence at the top of the mountain. He lives among us in the valley if we place him at the center of our lives. God lives not just in the drama, but in continuity. Okay, very beautiful thought. And I think that thought from Rabbi Sachs is consistent with actually a very interesting story that I want to go through, because I think this is very much the character of the month of Iyar, this idea of this consistency of the count of days. Okay, so I want to go through this piece it's from the book of Melachim, and this is the end of the story, the famous story of Eliyahu Hanavi when he goes to Har HaKarmel. And this is probably the most famous story about Eliyahu Hanavi, when he has this big showdown with the Nevi'ei HaBaal, the priests of Baal. Okay, And basically what happens in that story is that Eliyahu decides that once and for all, he wants to show Bnei Israel that they need to make a call. They can't keep worshiping Hashem on the one hand and then idolatry on the other. They have to make a call. And he thinks that there will be this great showdown where he goes to the top of the mountain and he challenges the prophets of Baal. And he says, okay, you try to offer your sacrifice and let's see how that goes. And I'm going to offer my sacrifice and you'll see that Hashem will choose mine. And of course, that's how it plays out, right? That the priests of Baal are jumping around and they're getting more and more extreme and none of it works. And then Eliyahu mocks them and he says, okay, he does it. He builds his mizbeach, and amazingly, fire comes from heaven and his sacrifice is accepted. And everybody, the whole crowd is blown away. And it looks like Eliyahu's plan is just working out fantastically well. Okay, and that's the story. That's the most famous story of Eliyahu. But what I want to go through is what happens afterwards. Basically, what happens is Eliyahu then becomes horribly depressed because he's doing all this in the time of King Achav and his wife Queen Izabel, and Izabel says, you know what, like, we got to get this guy Eliyahu, and Eliyahu is actually on the run. But after this big triumphal victory over the prophets of Baal, he actually is on the run for his life. And this is what happens. Okay, he has the following conversation with Hashem. Okay, so I'm going to start reading in Hebrew, and then we'll get to some of the punchlines. So this is Eliyahu. It says, he arose and ate and drank, and with the strength from that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. Okay, so this 40-day, obviously, where the imagery of Ma'amad Har Sinai is very clear. He actually goes. He actually walks 40 days and 40 nights until he gets to Horeb. There he went into a cave, and there he spent the night. Then the word of Hashem came to him, and he said to him, why are you here, Eliyahu? And he replied, I'm moved by zeal for Hashem Tzvaot, for Bnei Israel have forsaken your covenant, tore down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life. So he's sad. He's sad that what he's doing in the end isn't yielding results. Come out, he called, and stand on the mountain before Hashem. Okay, so let's go. Actually, let's do this. This is kind of the punchline. So Vayomer, and Hashem says to him, Tsev ve'amadta bahar lifnei Hashem. And this reminds us a little bit of the story of Moshe when he asks Hashem to show him his ways, and then he has this kind of mystical vision. So you have a reference to that. Again, this kind of Eliyahu Moshe connection here. And he says, Vehine Hashem over ve'ruach gdola ve'chazak mefarek harim meshaver slaim. So as Eliyahu is standing there, a powerful wind passes, and it's tearing up mountains and it's smashing stones before Hashem. The lo baruch Hashem, but Hashem was not. It says was not in this great wind. Ve'achar haruach ra'ash, and after the wind there was an earthquake. The lo v'ra'ash Hashem. But Hashem was not in the earthquake either. Ve'achar hara'ash esh. After that, after the earthquake came fire. The lo v'esh Hashem, but Hashem was not in the fire. Ve'achar ha'esh kol dvama daka. This is a famous line. And after the fire, there was a soft, still voice. And instead of all the other ones where it says Hashem was not in the wind, was not in the earthquake or in the fire, it seems that Hashem was in the still, soft voice. So what is this, the still, soft voice? I think part of it is consistent with what we went through before, this idea of the celebration of everyday simplicity that sets the tone for the month of Iyar, right? Not the great explosions, not the fireworks. In the case of Iyar, we're sandwiched in between, you could say, the fireworks of Pesach and Shavuot. But Iyar is about celebrating the quiet consistency of everyday actions of devotion. That's the Omer, the routine of Jewish life that expresses our dedication to being part of something bigger than ourselves. Okay, every day we count, every day. And if we miss even one day, then the count is broken. As we saw in the Midrash, as Rabbi Sachs said, a series of epiphanies of the ordinary. Okay, so this is the flow. This is the theme of the month. Count consistently, not just today, but every day. So if the month of Nisan, as we saw last time, was all about novelty and creativity and renewal, right? Iyar is the month of this quiet consistency. Yom, every day. Okay, but here's the challenge. It's all well and good to say that, but we all know how easy it is to sleepwalk through the day-to-day. Right? It's the daily grind. And consistency is no good if it turns into monotony. It becomes just habit and rote. And this happens to us very easily. Of course, we have big events in our lives. We have simchas, holidays, maybe a big birthday that you're looking forward to, or that big vacation that you have planned. There's always something off in the distance that you're looking forward to. It's easy to fall into the trap where you live only for the big moments, only for the highlights of the year, and everything else becomes like a blur. It's like when you get to Friday afternoon and you say to yourself, my God, what even happened this week? I can barely remember. I can definitely say that I'm guilty of that, okay? Too often we fall into a rut where ordinary life becomes almost like filler, where you're biding time between the more dramatic events that we all live for. So you might say that counting every day, this discipline of the Omer, counting every day is meant to be an antidote to that. For one moment, think about today. Okay. So it's funny, the same language of, in a more modern language, you'd say you should wake up and have an intention. Okay, so I think it's a more modern way of saying something that's inherent, in this idea of the Omer. Okay, so let's do another source that brings out a similar idea, but said in a different way. And this comes from the Ramban, talking about Sefirat HaOmer. Let's look at that together. So we know that in Vayikra, in that case, the description of the Omer goes as follows. It says, "Fartem lachem mimocharat haShabbat miyom haviachem et Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot mimot tiem." The day that you bring from the day after the Shabbat until you bring the Omer offering, you will count 7 full weeks. So on that line, Usfartem lachem, this is the Ramban's comment. He says, Usfartem lachem kemo ulkachtem lachem. So this language of you should count for yourselves is similar to when the Torah discusses the taking of the Arba Minim on Sukkot, right? The lulav and yetrog, etc. It says, "L'kachtem lachem," you will take for yourselves. Similar language. Shetehes sfira v'lekicha lechol echad ve'echad. That each person should do this. Shimane b'piv v'yazkir cheshbono kasher kiblu rabotein. So, in the same way as when it comes to the lulav, there's a law that each person needs to take a lulav. They actually have to own the lulav themselves. It's actually a mitzvah upon each person. Similarly, Ramban is saying there's an actual mitzvah for you to recite this counting and in that way remember the count. And we say, right, we make a bracha, right? Asher right? So we make that bracha because we're commanded to actually count, as opposed to, he says, ve'ein ken ve'safar lo, or ve'safra la. This is talking about, it says, the zavin, in the case of certain ritual impurity, a situation of ritual impurity, where it also says that he or she will count. But it says, but Ramban is saying that's quite different. Sheharei imratsu omdim betumatam. But in that case, they actually don't have to count. In fact, there's no obligation for them ever to even become pure. So not only do they not have to count, you actually don't have to become pure if you don't want to, right? But if you want to, you have to count the proper number of days. So it's Ella shelo yishkachu. The point of the count is so that you don't forget what day you're on. Vechen, and similarly, the Savarta lecha de Yovel. Similarly, in the case of Yovel, it tells us to count, but there also, Ramban says, there's not actually a mitzvah to count. It just says, shetizaher b'mispar shelo tishkaf. It's just saying you should count. You ought to count because you have to know what year it is. You have to know when you get to the 50th, so it's the Yovel. But there isn't an obligation to actually do the count. Not so in the case of the Omer, right? So what the Ramban, I think, is saying, right, is that the Omer is different. In the Omer, there actually is this mitzvah to count out loud and to declare, this is day X, not just so that you know when you get to Shavuot. We're not just counting, are we there yet, right? But to highlight, actually that day, that each day in between is special. You might say that the Omer makes it a mitzvah to experience today, every day. And this is hard. But the Torah tells us to try for a 7-week period and see how it goes. And hopefully that experience can help bring value to the rest of the year. Now, one last source with a little bit of a different twist. Rav Soloveitchik makes an interesting comment in a discussion about Sefirat HaOmer that adds one more dimension. Okay, so there he says as follows. Here's a quote. He says, in grammar, it's a little dense, but I'm going to read it, and then we'll go through it. He says, in grammar, we operate with 3 tenses, past, present, and future. However, experientially, the present can never be isolated and perceived as such. The point of time we call present lies either in the past or in the future. What is past? It's retrospection, recollection. And what is future? Future is anticipation, expectation. What we call present, as Soloveitchik, is nothing but the vantage position from which we look either forward or backward. Judaism requires of the Jew that he experience time in its 2 dimensions simultaneously. Okay, what might this mean? Maybe another way to say it is something like this. Okay. If you want to experience the here and now in its fullest sense, you have to know who you are. You have to know how you got here, and you have to know something about where you're going, or at least where you think you're going. And to know where you are, you have to look backwards, and you have to look forward simultaneously. That's how you know where you are. Okay. Now this is different. I'll make a distinction between this and some types of meditation, for example, where you might try to experience the here and now by stripping away any stray thoughts that you might have that might cross your mind, right? There might be thoughts about the past, something that happened to you, something about the future. These are stray thoughts. But in this type of meditation, to experience nowness, you would actually try to strip that away. Okay? Now that kind of meditation and the feeling of presentness that it's searching for can be extremely therapeutic, right? And it helps you clear your head when it's full of chatter. So it's not to make light of the value of this method of experiencing clear-headedness and presentness. In the same way as you wouldn't want to make light of any other thing that helps you become refreshed or focused or improve your performance. Okay, that's all very important. But I think what Rav Soloveitchik is getting at, and at least in part, is that feeling of presentness can't be the end all of what it means to be in the here and now. Okay? To get to the real you and experience what it is to be you right now, you can't just strip away as much as possible. There's nothing, if you keep stripping away, there's not anything deeper. If you strip all away, if you strip away all the particularities that make you, you, how you got here, looking backward, where you're going, looking forward, what's left is actually not the real you, it's a shadow of who you are. Or another way to think about it is that if you woke up with amnesia every morning, your life would be a thinner experience, not a more vibrant. Wake up free of your past, but you'd be confused about who you are and what you ought to do right. Okay? And similarly, looking forward is also a part of the feeling of now. Because the most vibrant experience that you can have in the here and now is actually when you're wrapped up in something bigger, and you have anticipation and excitement about what is to come. Okay? So when the you that's made up of all the experiences of your past looks forward with anticipation for what comes next, that is the most vibrant experience of the here and now. And I want to connect that to this idea of Sfartem Lachem, of counting every day. Sfartem Lachem, count every day, it's for you. Okay, try that for 49 days. It's harder than it sounds, but try it for a 49-day period, okay, and see whether that, what impact that has on you. So Chodesh Tov, wishing everyone a month of consistent engagement in your daily life, and we'll see you back in a month's time and see what comes next. All right, thanks everyone.